All right, excellent. Well, I would like to welcome Tanya. She is going to be speaking tonight as our main speaker for our Health and Wellness Online Circle. And she is a practitioner of Chinese medicine and has a clinic here in Katoomba in the Blue Mountains. And I would like to hand over to you, Tanya, if you want to tell us a little bit more about you, and we'll get ready for the evening.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. Tonight I want to have a chat about the energetics of food, because it was the energetics of food that got me into Chinese medicine. I studied a course on the energetics of food at Nature Care College, and it absolutely blew my mind. The whole concept of, food was more than just carbs, proteins, fats. It was far more than that, which actually opened my eyes and my belly a lot more to what was going on with what I was eating. So it was from doing that course at Nature Care College that I then went and spent a year studying at the Australian School of Macrobiotics, where I got my diploma in whole food counselling. And that was way back in 1995, so a very long time ago. So I've been working with food for, almost 30 years now. Having studied at the Australian School of Macrobiotics, I was then inspired to go and do my Bachelor of Health Science in Chinese Medicine, which I did completed in 2004. And then I've been working ever since as a Chinese medicine practitioner, but a lot of my focus is on diet, because if you can look at somebody's diet, if they can make even small changes in their diet, so many other things will be so much easier to shift. And then in 2020, I received my graduate certificate in human nutrition. So putting a bit of Western understanding or biomedicine understanding behind the Chinese medicine understanding, just to give it a bit more oomph. So with all of that, yes, I'm a practitioner in Katoomba, and it is Chinese medicine that the founding principles of Chinese medicine that direct what I do in dietary advice. So with Chinese medicine, the founding principles are all about yin and yang and the 5 phases. So yin is considered that cooling, calming, moistening aspect. Yang is more that heating, drying, active aspect of the body. So what we're always trying to do in Chinese medicine is balance up those yin and yangs. So if somebody's really cold, we want to balance that out and say, well, eat more warming foods. If somebody's very hot, it's like, well, let's take away whatever's heating you up and eat a little bit more cooling foods. If somebody's too damp, we need to eat more drying foods. If somebody's too dry, we need to eat more moistening foods. So we're always focusing on balancing that yin and yang. And then the 5 phases are all about the correspondences between the seasons, the organ pairs, and the flavors, as well as emotions and so many other things as well. So we'll go through all of that bit by bit as the evening progresses. So looking first at the concept of yin and yang, cooling and warming, you can Google anywhere, cooling foods and warming foods. And this is just something I found on the internet, rawforbeauty.com. Not anybody I support, just a pretty picture I saw. And when you look at these foods, you can see, all of your pictures are in the middle of mine. I imagine your view is slightly different, but you can see that the cooling foods would be the foods that you tend to eat more in summertime. So there's lettuce there's celery, there's coconut water and mangoes and all of these lovely summery foods, because in summertime it's hot and we need to cool down. And when you look at the picture of the warming foods, the basils and the cinnamons and the gingers and the cloves and these are all the sorts of foods we tend to eat more of in the wintertime, because they're going to help us be warm. So when we talk about the temperature of food, it's not the actual temperature of how is it on my tongue, but it's more how does it affect our body after we've digested it. So you'll notice that the plants that tend to take longer to grow, so root veggies, ginger, are going to be warmer than those plants that are very fast growing, or the really leafy ones, or the really watery ones. So more water content tends to be more cooling, because in summertime, we're going to be sweating a lot. We're going to need to replace that fluid loss. And dried foods tend to be more warming as well. So, for example, with ginger, dried ginger is going to be quite hot, whereas fresh ginger is just going to be warm. And it's going to have very different properties. In Chinese herbal medicine, we'll use dried ginger to actually warm somebody who's inherently cold, whereas we'll use fresh ginger to help disperse when you've got a cold. So when you've got a chill and you've got chills and the chills and fevers type cold. So there's a bit of a difference in those two. Also, when you think about the temperature of food, peppermint is very cooling, but even if you have a hot cup of peppermint tea, it's still going to cool you down. Whereas if you make yourself up a nice fresh ginger cordial, homemade one, not store-bought one, but one's actually got ginger in it, then you're going to find even if you have a nice ginger cordial in summertime, you're still going to have a level of warmth in your system. So it's got nothing to do with the temperature of how something feels. It's more about the impact it has on your system. How we cook will influence the temperature of foods. So, of course, raw foods are going to be more cooling, steamed foods more cooling, whereas, baked veggies are going to be much more warming. We'll have more baked veggies in wintertime. We'll tend to have more steamed veggies in the summertime. So the longer, slower cooking styles are much warmer than the quicker styles, which we can then use. Say, for example, apples are quite a cool food. If you want to have apples in the middle of winter, baked apples, stewed apples, poached pears in winter, lovely ways of adding cinnamons and gingers and things into the cooking, plus the cooking style that turns a cold food into a warm food. From a Chinese medicine perspective, we see the digestive system as a pot sitting on the stove bubbling away. So we want to keep that fire burning and that pot bubbling. So primarily it's best from our perspective to eat more cooked foods and more warming foods to keep that digestive fire burning. So to keep our metabolism strong. So let's have a look at the individual temperatures. So very, very hot foods tend to heat us up intensely, and then they'll cool us down through sweating. So when you think about the sorts of foods you eat in the tropics, you're going to be eating, strong chilies, strong curries, Thai food, Indian food. Those sorts of things are meant to heat you up so much that you'll sweat and cool down. If you eat too much of these really, really hot foods, again, you're going to damage the digestive system, because too much of anything extreme is damaging to the system. If you look at curries, for example, say curries from North India or South India, in North India, where it's really, really cold, the sorts of spices they put in their curries are the sorts of spices that are really going to warm you up. Whereas the sorts of spices used in South India are the ones that are going to overheat you so that you sweat and cool down. So all of these combinations will impact how we're feeling. So trout and lambs are the most heating of the fish and meats to eat. So really good things to eat in wintertime to warm you up. And especially if you're going to have, barbecued lamb chops, you got a hot food with a hot cooking style. So a really lovely thing to have in winter, but perhaps not right in the middle of summer. There's all the spices to add to things. So we'll talk about that later. So lovely hot spices, and alcohol, of course, is very heating to the system. So with the warm foods, you'll see there's a lot more options there. I'm not going to read through it all. I'll let you have a glance through those. You can, as I said, Google warming and cooling foods, and you'll see all the lists there. But warming foods tend to move our energy upwards and outwards from the core. So it's warming us up from the inside out. So when you tend to feel the cold, the best way to warm up is from the inside. So oats tends to be a typical winter breakfast because oats are warming. It's not just the cooking of it that's warming, but actual oats themselves are very warming. Peaches, lovely warm fruit. Chestnuts, walnuts. When you think about walnuts, and we'll talk a little bit more about the 5 correspondences later, but walnuts, they say, from a doctrine of signature perspective, looks after the brain. The brain is ruled by the kidneys. The kidneys correspond to the season of winter. So here you've got a lovely warming nut that's wonderful to have in winter. And what apple strudel or apple stew doesn't, taste even better when it's got walnuts in it. So those herbs in there, basil, cardamom, cloves, sorts of herbs you get in your chai teas and your mulled wines, because they're going to warm you up. Neutral foods should make up the bulk of our diet, and they're the sorts of foods we can eat no matter the season, no matter our health condition, because they're not going to overheat us, they're not going to cool us down, they're just there to nourish us. So rice, your fairly standard neutral, staple. Beetroots and cabbages and carrots and cauliflowers, lots of beans, lots of nuts, fish and meats, a few herbs in there that are fairly balanced there. So neutral temperatured foods. Cooling foods tend to direct our energy inwards and downwards. They tend to cool the upper part of us because hot air rises and we need to bring that warmth back down again. So barley and wheat are cooling. Now we tend to eat wheat 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But wheat is actually a very cooling grain. So it's sort of grain that you should be eating in the summertime, whereas oats is more the grain you should be eating in the wintertime. Job's tears, which is a form of barley, it looks like barley, but it's not barley, therefore it's gluten-free, is a lovely cooling herb that we even use as a medicinal herb in Chinese medicine because it's very cooling to the system. As I said, apples and pears are very cooling, but when you cook them up, you're going to warm them up for winter. Rabbit is one of the coldest meats around to eat, so good thing to catch and eat in winter, in summertime, if that's your preference. And mint, of course, we know is lovely cooling food. And then cold foods, again, eaten in excess, eaten out of season, or if you tend to have a weak digestive system, so for the very old, the very young, people who've been very sick, those are the sorts of people who really shouldn't go down that track of eating too many cold foods. Having a watermelon in the middle of winter is really not going to do us any justice. It's not eating seasonally, and it puts out that digestive fire. So bananas, again, are very cold food. I mean, when you think, again, in the tropics, usually when you get bananas, it's been cooked in coconut milk. So, you've got that cold fruit that has been cooked up to warm it up and make it less damaging to the digestive system. And rhubarb, we're always cooking rhubarb with, cooking it to warm it up and then adding, cinnamons and ginger. Well, I always cook it with cinnamon and ginger and apples and pears to sweeten it up and warm it up. Tofu should always be eaten cooked because it is so cold. And salt has a very cold nature. So now that you've sort of got a brief picture of what's hot, what's cold, just the way we change our wardrobe, you really benefit from changing your diet. So in the spring and the summertime, when energy is rising and energy is lifting and we're being more active and we're out there and we're doing stuff, this is a time to eliminate. We're sweating things out, we're moving more. So this is a time when we want to eat more cooling foods, not cold food or icy food, but just cooling foods, things to help balance us on those, 40-degree Sydney days. More of the greens, more of the sprouts, more of those above ground veggies, more flowers and leaves and foods that are growing in the season of spring and summer. lighter, shorter cooking styles like stir fries, water stir fries, steaming vegetables, much lighter soups. And we tend to reduce the salt and seasoning that we use in the summertime. Whereas in the wintertime and in autumn, when that energy is sort of coming and condensing and contracting, this is a time to store, to tonify, because in ancient days, you had to have harvested everything at the end of summer in order to have survived through the winter. So you're going to salt things, you're going to pickle things and sour things and preserve things to use them through the winter months. So those longer cooking styles of souping things and casseroling and stews, all of the goodness of those root veggies, of those winter veggies, is going to seep out into that whole meal and really nourish you up and warm you up. So we need to eat more warming foods, but not the hot foods. So again, all of those chilies and curries and things that make you sweat are going to cool you down when it's 3 degrees outside. Not good. So eating for your body type, generally, the first step is to eliminate things that are going to aggravate your condition and then add foods in that are going to benefit your condition. So if you tend to be a bit of a hot bod, then you've got to reduce those heating foods. And it's amazing how many people I see in clinic that sort of go, oh, I'm so hot all the time and I'm sweating and I just can't cope. And I sort of say, well, how's your diet? And well, I love chili and I'm eating chili all the time and curry's my staple. And I take my horseradish and garlic tablets every day to, sort my sinuses out. Well, these are foods that are going to add to that heat. They're stoking the fire. So we need to start cutting back on those if you can't cope anymore. So increase, and then you increase the cooling foods and the lighter cooking styles, but often just cutting out those hot foods will already make a huge difference. So if you're going to go with the cold foods, you really only want to go with those short term, because otherwise they're going to, again, put out that digestive fire. If you tend to be a bit of a cold frog, like I am, in the middle of summer, I've always got a cardigan with me, then, don't be one of those people who starts the day with an icy smoothie, because you're just putting more cold into your system. So avoid things straight from the fridge. This is not only putting out the digestive fire, but, it's chilling you to the bone. Minimize the raw foods, use slightly longer cooking styles, use more sweet, pungent and warming foods, both temperature and nature. So here we're looking at both sides of things. Don't have things straight out of the fridge, don't add ice to stuff, and look at the foods that are more warming in nature. We'll talk about what the flavors do later, but the pungent flavor, it disperses, it circulates. So if you put warmth in, you want that warmth to circulate around. Now, people who hate the humidity, they always feel like gravity's been turned up, they're full of phlegm or full of fluid retention or have various growths in their system, whether it's polycystic ovaries or a mass of some sort or goiters or whatever. Whenever there's those growths in the body, that's what we call dampness in Chinese medicine. Phlegm is just an accumulation of dampness. So again, the best way to address these conditions is, first of all, eliminate those foods that feed the damp. So dairy tends to be quite a common food that will, if you've got a phlegm problem, will add to that phlegm. If you don't have a phlegm problem, eat all the dairy you like. But when you come to me and sort of go, I don't feel well, it's like, okay, what's out of balance? If it's phlegm and dampness, then dairy is one of those things you're going to have to cut out. Bananas we talked about as being very cold foods. Peanuts tend to be quite phlegm aggravating. Too much cold and raw food, because it weakens the digestive system, then creates dampness, because dampness is often associated with a digestive system that's just not working properly, which then from a biomedical perspective or a naturopathic perspective, you'd be saying, well, you definitely need to add more pre and probiotics and that sort of thing as well. And of course, too much fruit, too much sugar will cause a lot of dampness within the body. Foods that tend to dry you out will be your diuretic foods. So Job's tears barley is a wonderful damp draining food. Celery we know is a diuretic. Onions and spring onions and chives and leeks, they're the pungent foods that will get things circulating and moving again. The cinnamons, the gingers, the cardamoms, they're going to warm you up. I mean, what do you do when you've got a damp or cold, wet food, clothes? You stick the heater on them. You want to dry it out by warming it up. So putting more warming spices into your diet will help you to warm up and dry out. Does that all make sense? Any questions about that?
No, it's great. It makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense to me from like a balancing point of view. And that's and I'm guilty of too much chili on everything that I eat. So I kind of go, oh, all right, so maybe when it's 2 degrees or -2 degrees and I'm cold, that I probably shouldn't put so much chili in my food.
Perhaps.
Yeah, but you think, because you think chili is warming, like, because it heats you, but as you said, if it heats beyond just warming, then it actually does cool. Because I've been known to actually drink hot tea and hot, like peppermint tea, as you said, in summer, or different types of warm drinks, and people are like, why would you do that? And it's like, well, it actually cools me off.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes sense.
It often is good to have a look at the origin of those foods. So, chilies come from the tropics, and it's hot in the tropics. They don't eat chili in Alaska.
They don't grow in Mount Victoria in summer. Or I mean, our summer that we've had, because it's been so cold.
So that was all about balancing the yin and yang. With anything, don't go to extremes. Too hot, too cold is going to send you out of balance. Whereas when you come closer in, more warming foods, more cooling foods, you can keep that balance happening. And of course, neutral foods are easy. What you might find, and what often threw me when I was first looking at all of this stuff, is you'll look at one website and it'll tell you, oh, pumpkins are warming. And then you'll look at another food in another website and it says pumpkins are cooling. What I believe is happening is that they're probably more in that neutral zone. And people are sort of going, well, the way I cooked it, it felt more warming, or the way I served it up, it felt more cooling. But I would say those foods that tend to, be confusing, I'd say probably belong to the neutral zone.
Yeah, I guess if you have a cold pumpkin salad, it's going to feel different than if you have like pumpkin in a stew, for example.
Yeah, pumpkin soup. Full of ginger and cinnamons and
other
or
things.
Pumpkin pie. And pumpkins are an autumn food. Traditionally, when you think about the Canada or the States, you serve up your pumpkin in October for Halloween because it's autumn. It's not spring. It's autumn. So it's going to warm you up. And all of the pumpkin spices that you add to it warm you up. So stepping away from
I've been studying Chinese metaphysics in terms of like Qi-Men, Basi, and Feng Shui. I'm just trying to see how this fits in. Like, for example, if you have a chart, like when you do the Basi chart that's missing fire, I wonder whether eating those, red foods, which are represented by the fire element, would help that person with that energy that they kind of maybe require in their chart.
You'd have to check and see how they're feeling, where they're at. If they're in the middle of menopause and they're, sweating all over the place, you might not want to add too many hot foods. So I'm not too sure about the charts.
Yeah, no, it's a different, it's still based on the 5 elements and the cycles and, the constructive and destructive. But it's a different application, yeah. And I was just wondering whether there is an overlap, because I'm just wondering that might be another way to kind of approach it, because usually you go to a particular sector of the house that has that energy to kind of fill up that missing kind of energy that you might be missing. Whereas, you might be able to eat foods that kind of help with that. Because you can do activities, for example. So for fire, you do spirituality. It's like, that passion kind of things. But, yeah.
I think from that perspective, you're going to want to look perhaps more at the flavors rather than the temperatures. So here we've got a picture of the 5 flavors. And I know there are other flavors when naturopaths or whatever look at the umumi flavor, neutral flavors, that sort of thing. But from our perspective with the 5 elements, we work with these 5 flavors, and we say that, you know, the bitter flavor nourishes the heart, it nourishes the fire energy. So if somebody is depleted in their fire energy, they may want to add a little bit more bitter foods in their diet, especially since most people don't eat bitter anyway, rather than hot foods.
Well, I think that was kind of what my question was, that it's kind of like helping with that particular energy that, you know, it's represented by fire, by eating like those bitter foods.
Yeah, but just be mindful that too much of anything is not good. You know, a little bit of everything is good for us. Too much of anything often tends to swing us off the edges.
I'm all for balance.
Yeah, so a moderate quantity will benefit the organs. A moderate amount of bitter foods benefits the heart. A moderate amount of sweet foods nourishes the digestive system. But too much throws us out. So, you know, a bit of pumpkin, a bit of sweet corn is great. Lollies, cookies, cakes, sugary drinks, all of those sorts of things are going to throw the digestive system out of whack. A little bit of good quality Celtic sea salt added to our cooking is going to benefit our kidneys. But all of that poor quality table salt added to a meal after cooking, or all of the poor quality salts that's in the highly processed foods, that's where, you know, we're throwing our whole system out of balance. And they're sort of saying, oh, salt is bad for you. Well, eating no salt at all is not good for you, because we actually need sodium chloride. Sodium, and it is an important part of our bodily processes. So a balanced diet uses all of the flavors. But predominantly it is the sweet flavor that we tend to focus on, because it's the sweet flavor that nourishes us and the sweet flavor that we crave. So many of the foods that we eat are in fact naturally sweet. It nourishes the digestive system. It is the flavor of the earth element. And when you think earth is nourishment. Earth is where we get our nourishment from. It's the flavor of late summer. It's soothing, but it's also moistening, which is where that phlegm and that dampness comes in. So if you're eating full sweet, so, you know, the complex carbs, then you're getting nourishment and energy. It's tonifying, it's strengthening. But those empty sweets, too much fruit, too many sweeteners, they're more cleansing, they're more cooling, they're often going to add a lot of phlegm into the system, a lot of dampness. So you can see from these charts, with each of these flavors, you're going to get cool sweet things and warm sweet things. So, you know, in the wintertime, as I mentioned, your warm oats for breakfast, nice and sweet. Whereas perhaps in the wintertime, in the summertime, perhaps more a buckwheat porridge, a cassia porridge, or a Job's tears porridge might be more cooling to the system, rather than, you know, who wants a heavy oat porridge in the middle of summer? You don't want that. But perhaps the Birch's muesli can be good because you're having it in a more cool way. So different sweet vegetables, you know, Chinese cabbage is sweet, spinach is sweet, but it's cool. Pumpkin is sweet, but it's hot. Avocado is sweet but cool. Red dates, other dates are sweet but hot. So you can see that there are foods that are warming, foods that are cooling, that all have that sweet nature that nourishes us. And often if you find you're craving sweets, which is everybody's big issue, it's because we're craving nourishment. So we're either not eating appropriately for the rest of what we're eating, or we're not digesting and absorbing the nutrients our body needs. And therefore our body is going, give me some nourishment, because what you're eating just isn't being absorbed properly. So that's when we look at other aspects, again, from my perspective, Chinese medicine, how to strengthen that digestive system so you can better absorb what you're eating.
Can I ask a question, Tanya, with that then? So if people are having a lot of sweet cravings, that's because in this perspective, it's because they're not getting the nutrients or the nourishment out of the other food that they're eating. So they just keep almost like supplementing with sugar in the hope that that's coming, that like it's a fake supplement. Yeah.
I also like to look at it from a bigger perspective as well, as in we're craving sweetness in life. So to look at how we can nourish ourselves at so many different levels, you know, can we make sure that the pictures on our walls are nourishing, and that the music we listen to is nourishing, and that the smells, you know, the incense we're burning, or the oils we're burning, or the bunch of flowers we bought ourselves the other day smell beautiful, that the clothes we're wearing feel beautiful. So if we bring sweetness into the other senses and make sure that we're also having enough of the sweet vegetables, so sweet potatoes, pumpkins, those sorts of things, then you'll often find that you won't need as much of the chocolate and the sugar and the cakes and those sorts of sweets as much.
Excellent. Excellent.
I'm just getting the cable. I'll be back.
So the sweet flavor is the bulk of what we're eating, but we need the other 5 flavors as well. So we need a little bit of pungent flavor in there, because pungent is what nourishes the lungs. It's the flavor of autumn, of the metal element. It's dispersing, it's decongesting, it's stimulating. So it's really great when you've got colds and flus. So if you, because that of course is affecting the lungs. So if you have, I think I mentioned earlier, a cold, so, you know, the neck and shoulders are painful, and you've got the chills and your nose is dripping clear, you need to warm yourself up, but you need to warm and disperse to clear out that pathogen that's in your system. So that's where, you know, your ginger, your fresh ginger teas and cinnamon stick and fresh ginger will come in and help you to disperse what's going on. Whereas if you've got a hot cold, so if you're a bit febrile, if you've got a bit of a, you know, green snot and sore throat, you might want to go with the peppermint tea to help cool things down. And the strong Chinese peppermint is much more dispersing than, you know, Lipton's peppermint tea bags. But it's going to disperse and get that energy flowing, you know, dispersing. I keep using the same word. It also helps decongest. One of the very first herbal formulas in our Materia Medica is a formula containing shallots or spring onions, because of that pungent nature of the alum family. So adding, you know, when you've got a chesty cough, when you're full of phlegm in the chest, coughing a lot, have more of the radishes and the onions and the leeks and those dispersing foods. Does that make sense? The salty flavor tends to nourish the kidneys. It's the flavor of winter, because in winter time we will tend to eat more salty foods, whether we preserve them with salt, whether we're cooking, you know, roasting veggies or making soups and stews and casseroles. We're going to add a bit more salt and spices into those meals. We say that they say that the salty flavor softens the masses. And when you think about it, seaweed is a very salty food. And if you've got goiters, sea vegetables, seaweeds will help to reduce that. Is it the saltiness or is it the iodine? So certainly there's an iodine aspect in there, but for other masses as well, we'll often use seaweeds in our herbal formulas to help reduce growths within the body. So ham, of course, is salted just to preserve it. Soy sauce, tamari, miso are all lovely ways of adding salts into things. If you want to add more flavor to things after they've cooked, gamagio is a really lovely way of doing that. Gamagio is a Japanese seasoning that is like 14 sesame seeds to 1 part salt. And that's a really lovely way of adding salt after the fact that's not going to overdo your poor kidneys. Dukkha is also another lovely addition to put on things when you're sort of thinking, well, this isn't quite salty enough or flavorful enough. I need to add something to it. Dukkha and Gamagio are really lovely ways to go. So salt, the salty flavor can be diuretic, purgative, laxative. Just think of Gerber salts. That's a laxative and a half. It stimulates the digestive function, the salt. So we know that grains are often more digestible when you add a pinch of salt to them. They say in Chinese medicine that the kidney energy is the pilot light of the digestive energy, because the kidney energy is our foundational energy. The kidney energy rules the brains, so it can improve concentration. So these are all lovely salty foods that we can make sure that we're adding into our meals. And again, these are lovely ways of adapting a neutral menu to the individuals at the table. Because often you'll sort of say, oh, one person in my family is really hot, and somebody else in my family is really cold, and somebody else is damp, and somebody else is dry. How am I supposed to cook for everybody? Well, you cook a neutral meal, and then at the table, you have things like Gamagio to add a bit more salt, or tamari to add a bit more salt, or some shallots chopped up to add a bit more dispersion in there, or other condiments that you can put in, so sauerkrauts or pickles as the sour flavor to do what that sour does. So by adding these condiments, you're adding a bit more of the different flavors into a meal. So the sour flavor, which is where I was just going, nourished as the liver. It's the flavor of spring. So it's got that rising energy of springtime, when all the sprouts are now starting to come up, everything's starting to grow outwards. So the sour flavor tends to do that. First thing in the morning, a glass of nice warm lemon water will kickstart that liver, help you with your digestive system. We'll often use the sour to astringe. So if you're sweating a lot, or if you've got loose stools, diarrhea, we'll use those flavors to contract and draw things back in. It'll stimulate secretions from the gallbladder and the pancreas, so it'll help with the digestive system. And they tend to alkalize the body. So even though these sour flavors are more acidic outside the body, once they're in your system, they'll help you to alkalize. So they'll help bring everything back into balance. So, so adding a lovely bit of balsamic vinegar to a frittata or something can often help you better digest what's happening in that meal. Hawthorn is a wonderful herb that we use in naturopathy. It's used a lot for heart health, but in Chinese medicine, we use it for indigestion. Have a cup of hawthorn tea and it'll just help move that digestive system through. Cheese and yogurt tend to be sour, of course, they're fermented, but they also have a sweetness to it. So sometimes things are not purely sour. I mean, a lemon or a lime will be purely sour. Umeboshi plums are purely sour, but a lot of these other fruits are sweet, but they're sweet and sour. So they'll be listed in that sour table.
And also it would depend on the ripeness of it too, yes. Wouldn't it? Right. So eating something that's sort of at the greener side or less ripe would be more sour than
when it's very ripe. It'll be much sweeter.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the bitter flavor. So, chicory is pretty much the only food that was listed as pure bitter. Everything else is bitter and salty, or bitter and sweet, or bitter and pungent. It nourishes the heart. And we don't eat nearly enough bitter foods in our diets, other than people drinking too much coffee. So it's often that bitterness that people are missing. So by adding a bit more radicchio or the endives or the watercress or capers or dandelion tea, you're going to get more of that bitter flavor in your system. And bitter improves your appetite, improves your digestion. I mean, look at your Swedish bitters, look at your aperitifs and your digestives, the spirits that the good old monks have all created in their various monasteries that are full of wonderful herbs that ultimately have a bitter flavor to be had either before a meal or after a meal to help you digest it. So bitter is wonderful. Traditionally, we say bitter dries and drains. So when you think of dandelion tea, it's a great way of detoxing the liver. Rhubarb root, senna tea, aloe vera, all of these things are laxatives. They're going to drain the body of wherever it needs to be drained of. So that's that bitter flavor. This is one of my favorite dressings that I thought I would share with you because it's got all of the 5 flavors in it. So you've got miso in it, which is salty, umi paste, which is sour, lemon juice, which is sour, tahini, which I personally find very bitter, but I love tahini, bit of soy milk, which is sweet, and then the chives, which are pungent. So this is a lovely dressing to put on boiled rice or roast vegetables or steamed veggies. We use it all the time in our house. My kids just loved it growing up.
Definitely going to try that because I love creamy dressings. And I can't find any that you can buy. So I try to buy without so much crap in them. Yeah. So yeah, definitely we'll look at that because it sounds very holistic.
It is a delicious sauce, delicious dressing. So the primary book that I use today to classify everything as hot or cold or what flavor it was this book by Daverick Leggett. It's a really good book. I have it here in clinic. I flip it open to share with clients so that they can see. It's got all the tables at the back. It's got sections in the middle that sort of go, okay, well, if I'm cold, what foods should I eat? What foods should I avoid? If I'm hot, what foods should I eat? What foods should I avoid? If I'm damp, if I'm yin, if I'm yang, if I'm blood, if I'm qi, no matter what's going on, it's got really simple tables in there. So that's a lovely book, nice thin book that you can get a hold of. Food for the Seasons is another wonderful book. It's got numerous recipes in it, but it's got whole chapters on how do I nourish my liver in the springtime? How do I nourish my kidneys in the wintertime? How do I nourish my lungs in the autumn? How do I nourish my heart in summer? So it talks about the seasonal foods, the organ foods, the flavors, the different types of foods. And it's got, maybe half a dozen recipes for each season. Not a lot, but it's more about just getting more information. So that's a really, really lovely book. So yes, I've just rushed through that quickly. I'm not sure if we've gone too fast or if you want to go back over any of the slides, let me know. But it's that combination of diet as well as, if diet isn't cutting it, then we add herbs. If the diet plus the acupuncture is not cutting it, then we put in stronger medicine. So it's that step-by-step approach of you look after yourselves between visits. Let me tweak things at each visit. Any questions?
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
I'm in the car driving. I'm just listening. In terms of, this is a specific question, and I just thought I'll just ask it because I have your attention. In terms of like migraines and stuff like that, is there, so 2 questions, is there like part of my body it would be related to, or what could I use like in terms of herbs and stuff, like what would you suggest?
So from a Chinese medicine perspective, we don't tend to treat conditions, we treat people. Yeah. So if I can have 5 different clients in one day that all have migraines, and each of those people will have a migraine for a different reason. Yeah. So in order to determine what the best foods to eat or the best things to do or the best herbs to take, I would need to have a case history from you so I can work out what else is going on. I would then have a look at your tongue and see what color is your tongue. If your tongue is very, very red, there's probably an indication that there's a lot of heat in your body and your system needs to cool down a bit. It rises. So migraines can be about heat in the system. could be that when I feel your pulses, there's a massive weakness in the body. And often when we have headaches or migraines, it's actually our brain screaming at us, please nourish me, look after me. So there can be deficiencies within the system that then need to be nourished, whether that's a deficiency of blood, deficiency of qi, or from a biomedical perspective, you know, iron deficiency or some other nutrient deficiency. It's not where we go, but there are those equivalences. So it's impossible for me to say, you know, if you have a migraine, this will help you, because we need to work out what is it that's giving you that migraine. Where is the imbalance?
You probably just answered it then, mind you, because I think it is probably related to heat. So that does that's just really interesting, that the way that you put that, looking at the tongue. And
and sometimes, you know, migraines are hormonal. So, you know, at what point in the cycle do the migraines show up? Because our bodies tend to be a lot hotter in the second half of our cycle because of the extra progesterone in the system. Yeah. So it might be that it's not so much a matter of eat cold cooling foods, but, you know, cut out those heating foods, but let's work at how we can bring the body back into balance without swinging the pendulum way off into the other direction.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. It was super interesting. And I just loved like trying to relate it to what I've been learning as well, because it, you know, it's just, I can see the similarities of some things. Yeah.
Well, look,
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
You did mention about sweet and that the body's not being nourished.
Mm-hmm.
When I eat something, I really want something sweet afterwards. Is that because the body hasn't had the nourishment yet? I can have like really healthy food, but I still want something sweet to finish.
That can sometimes just be habitual.
Okay.
And also often, again, we need to balance the yin and yang. So if we've had really, really salty foods, our body's going to crave a sugariness to balance that aspect. So the more meat we're eating, the more sweets we might crave afterwards. Whereas if we tend to have more of a plant-based diet, we will tend to crave sweets a little less. But a lot of it's also, you know, sugar's addictive.
Yes.
Chili is addictive, sugar is addictive. It's really difficult to try and break that habit. I know I'm guilty of that on many occasions. You know, I'm used to, I'll have a dessert or at least a sweet treat of some sort. And sometimes I find just having a licorice tea, you know, there's no sugar whatsoever or sweetener of any description in there, but licorice is naturally sweet. So sometimes just having a licorice tea after a meal will give me that sweet kick that I need, or having a piece of fruit after the meal, because, you know, the heaviness of meats need that lighter energy. So sometimes just having a piece of fruit at the end of the meal helps balance that heaviness and that lightness of the meal itself.
Yeah, I find that I want to have just something little sweet, like after I've had my lunch, and then I just have something, even though I've had enough food, but I just feel like I need something little, like a sweet, and then after that I'm all good.
Often it's just habitual. It's our habit of doing that.
Yeah, it's well, it's a social thing as well, isn't it? It's how we've been brought up, and it's the thing you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if and Tanya, if you crave, so I eat a lot of fermented foods and different things like that. So, and I don't eat a lot of sweet food, and I'm guilty of always going, oh, that's too sweet. Like it's like, because I don't eat a lot of sweet foods, and I've kind of trained my body against it, that if I eat something that's not typically considered sweet, I still find it quite sweet. But I crave the savory, not necessarily salt, but lots of flavor and savory. So then I kind of go, okay. So how, like, is that an also, because it's a craving still, right? So it's obviously an imbalance, because it's just the opposite side. It's a different.
When you're doing a lot, when you go, and you're high adrenal, you're draining the kidneys.
Right.
So the kidney energy is going to go, please give me some bit more nourishment, and the salty flavor helps to support the kidneys.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. So, you know, it's rare that people will crave sour, although I must admit I love sauerkraut of any description. And, you know, for me, a meal's not, well, especially my lunch, I need that sour, because that sour helps me digest the meal, because I have a weak digestive system, which I suppose is why I went down this path, as we all do. We follow the paths that we need supporting.
Yeah, and I would say the same with me, right? And that's why I got into fermented foods and foods that way, because it's the digestion, it's all of that. And then again, those digestive foods or the fermenting, I do wild fermentation, so I use salt as a fermenting stability. So it's, yeah, it does make sense. So that's
so
great.
You're supporting the kidneys, you're supporting the adrenals with that.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the springtime, you know, there's nothing nicer than a lovely cool kombucha, because it's got that souriness that is helping the liver to detox of the winter stodginess, you know, because we've eaten those heavy, warming, nourishing, supportive foods through the winter that we need to get us through the winter. But then springtime is a time of detoxing. So we need those foods that move things upwards and outwards, or downwards and outwards, just to clear our system.
It makes total sense. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if there were any other questions. So this is how we can contact you?
Yep.
Awesome.
My website's there. I've got an online booking system. That's my phone number. And I think hopefully that QR code will get you to my link tree.
That's perfect. What I will do is I might stop.
I might try it.
Stop the recording. And I just do want to say before I do that, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for all your valuable information. It's great. I mean, everybody knows that I am a big foodie from a nutritional point of view. So is Isabel. So is actually everybody that's on tonight knows the value of food and what we put in our body, and just all these different tips, little bits here and there that we can take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and add that to our daily life. Just, I know, makes such a difference.
It's just a different way of looking at food.
Yeah, for sure.
It's good to
Yeah,
be able to
definitely.
look at it from all different sides.
Yeah, different perspective, and it's nice to look at it from like a more spiritual kind of energetic way.
So, right, I will stop the recording.